Great. Are y'all ready?
Yeah. So I think officially I'm the moderator, but actually Sam is going to be steering behind the scenes. So Sam, if you want to go ahead and start sharing. And actually Samuel is going to introduce everybody to this project. And then when I take over from him, I'll introduce myself a little bit, and then maybe, and Sam, when you take over, if you would give yourself a little introduction, that would be great. So we'll build in introductions into the presentation.
Okay. You will actually introduce yourself. I'll mention you, and then Sam will introduce himself. We ready?
I think we are. I think we're ready to go.
I think so.
Greetings. I'm Samuel Jordan, President of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, or BTEC. BTEC began as a coalition of community economic development advocates that responded immediately in opposition to the cancellation of the Red Line rail project by Governor Larry Hogan in June of 2015. We continue to lead the fight for completion of the Red Line project. The Red Line is a transit service that will greatly improve transit equity and is accompanied, like light rail across the country, by jobs and what is called transit-oriented development that together will transform the Baltimore regional economy. In addition, the Red Line improves the commutes of residents who may lack access to cars and reduces harmful gases and pollutants emitted by vehicular exhaust. A few years back, I met Megan Latshaw, who will be talking with you later, and we discussed how we could work together to improve transit equity in Baltimore. In particular, I wanted to know which Baltimore neighborhoods have the greatest need for investment in transit equity. When advocating for the community and lobbying for funding, I need to know and need to have hard evidence indicating where to find the hotspots. Next slide, please. And with the understanding that several questions are always involved, I wanted to look at 4 themes. Thus, we created 4 maps highlighting transportation access, social vulnerability, air quality, and health. Next slide, please. Although you can probably guess several of the ways these 4 factors interplay with one another, it is truly impressive to actually see how much one can impact the rest. One simple pathway is that cars release emissions into the air, which lead to worse air quality, which leads to respiratory conditions such as asthma and COPD. But transportation is more than getting around, as mentioned at the beginning. Transportation can also be the difference between access and isolation. It can simplify getting to jobs, grocery shopping, social connection, and other resources such as healthcare. Public transportation is especially important to residents with limited access to cars, such as the elderly, disabled, and low-income households. Communities with strong public transportation systems can reduce the nation's carbon emissions by 37 million metric tons yearly, contributing to cleaner air and healthier lungs before even getting to the health and equity benefits of mitigating climate change. I'll introduce you now to Dr. Megan Latshaw.
Sorry, I'm going to take over here. That's all right. Thank you, Samuel, for setting up the research question for us. I am Sam Helmey. I'm a data analyst at the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. And I met the BTEC research team because we were interested at BRHP in exploring the impact of transit equity on housing mobility and how those 2 things interacted, especially in the lives of our program participants. So I began working with them on regionalizing the city report. Since the data analysts who developed the methods for the city report aren't available today, I'm going to present those methods. I'll try not to go into excruciating detail, and if there are questions at the end, we can explore those and clarify anything that we glossed over. But to begin, we have an index of transit equity, which is comprised of 6 indicators. The 2 most complicated by far in terms of the methods are the estimated average commute time and the difference in average commute time. We will revisit those at the end. The next 2, the distance to high frequency transit stops and the number of stops per tract, were both from general transit feed specification data. GTFS data are presented in a schema that is uniform across public transit systems from one municipality or county to another. Many municipalities and counties make these available publicly, and the MTA does that. You can go to their developer resources page and download the GTFS files for all of their transit systems. So the number of stops was from those data, and we just counted the number of stops per census tract. We calculated the distance from each block centroid, from each census block centroid to the nearest high frequency transit stop, the stop that's serving a high frequency route. Those are CityLink routes, basically, as defined by the MTA. The next 2 indicators, percent of population commuting via transit and percent with a commute time that's greater than 45 minutes. Both of those are from 2017 5-year American Community Survey estimates. The American Community Survey, or ACS, is a program of the Census Bureau. It's a survey that's conducted annually. It doesn't cover the entire population like a census, of course, but it estimates quite a wide array of neighborhood indicators, economic indicators, et cetera. So percent of population commuting via public transit and percent with commute time greater than 45 minutes, both of those are for census tract level geographies. So each of these was put on a map and layered. I'm going to skip ahead so we can take a look at the overall transit equity map. I'll go right back. So all of those layered together make up our composite transit map. Individually, we have the distance to the high frequency transit stops, percent commuting by public transit, percent of the population with a commute time that's greater than 45 minutes. That's of people who are using public transit. So let's take a slightly closer look at the estimated average commute time, how we calculated that. This came from 3 data sources. Longitudinal employer household dynamics, origin destination data. These are data that say essentially how many people from each geography, each census block are commuting to any other census block, and what industries they work. There's great documentation at lehd.ces.census.gov. I don't know if Megan, if you have access to the chat to drop some links in there. If
I'm
not,
doing it
I can
right
do that
now. Yep.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. So there's great documentation on the LEHD origin destination data here. And there is a really excellent discussion of the difference between loads and ACS, both of which deal with commuting that you can access here. It's a study from 2014, or a report from 2014. And real quick, we can take a look at what these loads data look like. and how we're using them to calculate an estimated commute time. So here's our estimated average commute time. From track 1207, there are workers who are commuting to each track with one of these blue markers. So we are averaging the estimated commute time for each of those people, for each of those routes, really, and weighting them by the number of people using each route. And then we're also weighting this average by the percent of the population using public transit and the percent of the population who are not. We're assuming that they're commuting by car. And so we're combining weighted averages of estimated public transit commute time and estimated commute time by automobile. So how did we get those estimated commute times to average them in the first place? Sorry. Well, again, we used GTFS data. It was loaded into ArcGIS, and processed in order to create feature classes for transit lines and stops and for roads, and connect them and basically determine which is the shortest route from point A to point B by bus or by car for each of these respective components of that estimated average. It's a little in the weeds, we can skip over it and go back if anybody has questions. But we made a few assumptions to get an estimate of transit time, public travel time by public transit. For instance, walking speed to the nearest stop. So our estimate ends up looking like this on a map. Our weighted average. And then using a very similar method, we arrived at the difference in average commute time, the difference in average commute by public transit and by car. So again, for each origin track to a destination track, we calculated this difference. And then combine them into an estimate for the origin track. And again, here's our composite with all of those indicators together. Number of stops, distance to the nearest high frequency stop, the percent of the population commuting by public transit, the estimated average commute time, and the difference between travel time by public transit and by car. The second component of our overall investment need map is social vulnerability. So the CDC estimates social vulnerability, which is again a composite of a number of factors. And the purpose of this is to determine which areas are home to communities that for a number of reasons would have a lot of difficulty responding to a natural disaster. And each of these four components of overall vulnerability, socioeconomic status, household composition and disability, minority status and language, and housing type and transportation, are in turn made up of a composite of a number of indicators. And most of these are just shares in population in a census tract, right? And again, we have all of those layered in one map. Really, we're just representing the CDC's overall vulnerability indicator on this map. But each of those split out looks a little different. Each looks a little different from the other, of course. It's evident that the black butterfly and white L that we're all pretty familiar with is visible here, except in housing type and transportation, which reflects the type of housing and its geographic distribution. So most of the multifamily housing is concentrated in these dark purple tracts. And if there are any questions about transit equity methods for those estimates or for the social vulnerability index, we can go back to those at the end, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Megan.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and actually share my screen. I had changed the slides just a little bit, Sam.
Sure thing.
And so just as I do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Megan Latshaw. I work at Johns Hopkins University at the School of Public Health, and my department is Environmental Health and Engineering. And let me take it from here. So we recruited a student from the School of Public Health, Emma Holland. She was getting her master's in public health, and she actually did this analysis, and she couldn't be with us here today, so I'm going to be presenting on her behalf. For air pollution measures, we chose these because A, air pollution is linked with transit, right? The more cars on the road, the more air pollution there is, but B, air pollution is also linked to public health, right? So the more air pollution you breathe, the more likely you are to have health outcomes, which we'll talk about later. And the 5 indicators that we chose that are listed on this table are indicators that are both associated with transit and with health outcomes. And they were all available on EPA's environmental justice screening tool, which is called EPA EJ Screen. So particulate matter, the first one, ozone and diesel are all byproducts of fuel consumption. This respiratory hazard index is a composite score that comes out of the National Air Toxics Assessment that EPA does, and it considers the health threat of several pollutants. It actually includes ozone and particulate matter, but it also includes things like SOx and NOx, which are different types of air pollutants known to have impacts on health, and also lead, something that a lot of people have heard of, as well as carbon monoxide. And finally, we also included traffic proximity, which basically calculates the presence of cars on highways near to each of the census tracts that we were looking at. And what we did for this and for all of our indicators is we converted the raw data, so the numbers, which may have been, in this case, a score from 0 to 1. In the case of particulate matter, it may have been 0 to 100, or for ozone, it may have been 1,000. So we converted them all onto a percent rank scale, and we ranked them against all of Baltimore City. So everything got scored on a 0 to 100th percentile. And as Sam noted, the higher the percentile, the sort of was considered not ideal, right? So I'm going to show you a map. Our composite air quality map is right here. It looks a little bit different than the maps that Sam showed, where you saw that white L and the black butterfly. It's because of limitations in the data that's available. So in Baltimore, we only have 3 EPA air quality sensors. And so this is what you get when you model the data from those 3 air quality sensors. It does make sense. The results that you see, you see a lot of areas of concern when it comes to air pollution around the Patapsco River and downtown. And that could be related to traffic, as well as the port industry that surrounds the water, as well as the nearby incinerator. So I'm going to show you each of the indicators that went into making that composite map. So the first was particulate matter, 2.5. That's very small particles that get released into the air, that when we breathe them in, they can get really deep into our lungs and cause some problems. The second is ozone, and it looks very similar to the particulate matter map. ozone is, again, it's generated when fuel is burned in cars and trucks. And it's highest in the summer months. And so we used the summer average. Diesel particulate matter, this, probably follows the truck routes coming from 95 into the downtown area of Baltimore. And then here's the respiratory hazard index that I mentioned. Traffic proximity is a little bit different looking than the other maps, and it makes sense. You can see 83, I-83 heading north. You can see 895, the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel to the east. And then I'm going to just come back and close with, again, we took all those indicators and we put them into one map that we called the air quality map. And now I'm going to turn to health, to the indicators that we chose for health. We had 6 indicators that went into making the overall health burden map. And since the project focuses on transportation, these health impacts are almost all transit-related respiratory hazards. They can be due to other causes as well, but they're all linked with transportation. And they're correlated with higher levels of air pollution. So I want to just point out that some of these measures are just a proxy for disease, okay? So because it was really tricky to track down good data. So let's take, for example, heart disease, okay? This is represented by hospital discharges for heart attacks, but that's not the same thing as heart disease, right? It's just an indicator of heart disease. And you can see, as I mentioned, it was really hard to find data. We had to go to 4 different sources to get our health data. Here's our composite health map. Again, you kind of vaguely see that the white L and the black butterfly. And that's probably because there can be a higher prevalence of the illnesses that we're looking at there. I'm going to break it down into each of the indicators for you. Here's asthma, very strong white L, black butterfly. COPD, again, same pattern. Lung cancer is a little bit different. We didn't necessarily have a good theory about why that was so different. Heart disease was very different. This is sort of a reversal of the white L and black butterfly. And this was true not just for heart disease, but also for lung cancer, COVID-19, and low birth weight. What we were thinking of the reasons for that is, of course, quality of data available, but also the fact that several of these indicators are proxies. So hospital discharge data, for example, for heart disease, that selects for the population of people maybe that have health insurance and have access to health care, right? So there's probably a lot of people with heart disease that maybe didn't go to the hospital and didn't get discharged from the hospital. And we weren't capturing that. For COVID-19, we think that might be influenced by those who have access to testing. And also lastly, analyzing raw case counts doesn't really take into account the severity of the illness. And so different measures for COVID-19 that might indicate severity might have a different pattern. So we do need more data for a lot of these health impacts. Here's the COVID-19 data. Here's the low birth weight data. And then that brings us back. We combined all of those maps into one for our composite health map. And once again, we come back to the overall health map, which mostly follows the broad pattern. I'm sorry, I keep going back and forth. Of the white L and the black butterfly. So this map has transit, all of the transit indicators in it. It has all of the social vulnerability indicators in it. It has all of the air pollution indicators in it, and it has all of the health indicators in it. And as with all the previous maps, a darker color indicates the highest opportunity for investment in transit equity. And what we see is that poor access to transportation lines up with vulnerable populations, not surprising, right? And also with a lot of different health effects. Now, we presented these results to the Baltimore Sustainability Council, and they had a great suggestion. They said, why don't you do a sensitivity analysis and pull air pollution out, because it was such a weird indicator, and also pull COVID-19 out, because that data was just so different and maybe questionable. And when we did that, we took out air pollution. That changed the map slightly. It increased the number of high need neighborhoods, but not dramatically. And then if we further excluded COVID-19, that actually decreased the density of the high need neighborhoods. And what we decided at the end is just to continue with the maps that included COVID and air pollution, because that was consistent with our original goals, and it didn't seem to change the results dramatically. And I'm going to turn it over to Samuel to take this home.
You're muted. Can't hear you.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Sam. Since it was our vision to identify neighborhoods, the report, as you've heard and seen, highlights these 6 areas on the composite map with the most need for investment. Currently, our team is conducting outreach to share our findings and to influence public policy in order to address these needs. And we hope, of course, to secure more funding. But this report is being used in that pursuit to explain to stakeholders this complicated issue. Projects like this are pivotal in terms of informing legislators of this ongoing problem. For example, a bill was introduced last year, HB 1204, the Transportation Equity Analyses and Assurances Act of 2021, making equity a central goal for transportation planning in Maryland, creating a commission on transportation equity as an independent transit monitor and evaluator, directing the Maryland Department of Transportation to collect and analyze data on racial disparities and impacts on persons with disabilities, and creating a state-level equity analysis process to ensure that transit changes don't create a disparate impact. We also submitted a draft report to the U.S. Department of Transportation through a public comment period about how to measure transit equity. We hope they will consider this model for other jurisdictions. And by the way, PennDOT in Pennsylvania has already asked about our methods, and there will be others. Thank you so much.
And we're going to post the final Baltimore City report. You can see the front cover of it on the right at the link that's listed here very soon, along with a short video about the project that you can see on the left. Right now, the link, if you go to it, it only shows the interim report, which included transit and equity, but not pollution and health. Now, Sam Helmey has already completed the regional analysis for transit and social vulnerability. And we also have a recent grad who is going to be doing a regional analysis for air pollution and health outcomes. So still more to come. And just to acknowledge all the great work of our team, you've met Samuel, you met me. Sanjana Boyapelli is behind the scenes, basically doing everything to make sure we look good today. She created the slides and just keeps us on track and is amazing. Emma Holland did the air pollution and health analysis. Ishtiaq and Annie both did the Baltimore City transit inequity analysis, and Sam Helmey is doing the regional transit inequity analysis. And Mary from the University of Florida helped out as well. So that's it. Thank you. We'd like to open it up for questions. If you guys don't have questions for us, we have questions for you. Basically, we want to know, what do you think? Do you have any personal experience with these issues? Did we miss anything? What else should we include? And if you want to be involved. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Do we want to take a look at the video, or maybe pause for questions and come back to it?
Yeah, maybe if we have time, maybe that we can show that at the very end, just to remind everybody. It's only 2 minutes, so it'll be quick. Good. So what do you all think? Is this your first time hearing about this? Do you have concerns along these lines? Why did you come today? What did you learn? What do you think we should be doing differently? Are
And
you
when
all
you
still
think
with
of,
us?
and when you think of pollution and public health, do you envision a connection with transportation?
I wonder if folks are multitasking.
Just to verify, Salam, can you verify that everyone has the ability to write in the chat box and unmute themselves if they'd like?
Okay, well, how about we show the video then?
Sure.
I can go ahead and do that, or Sam, you can do it. It's up to you.
Yeah, I've got it.
Confirmed,
I'll go
Sam,
ahead.
Was that confirmed that everyone does have access to the chat?
It looks
Yeah,
like I
but-
see Nirvana.
Mhm, mhm.
Somebody took pity on us and wrote in the comments. Yeah, Nirvana, I feel like Atlanta has its own set of issues, gosh, with transit and equity and traffic. Every time I go to Atlanta, the traffic, oh my goodness.
And we worked, by the way, with a group that calls themselves the Marta Army.
Oh,
And they
really?
are intense advocates for equity in the Marta system.
Great. So I see the questions are coming in. This is awesome. Sam, why don't, or Sam,
Good.
yeah, Sam, why don't you show the quick video and then we'll get to the questions. Thank you all for posting. We'll do, it's just 2 minutes. So we'll do that and then we'll get to the questions.
Can you all hear audio?
Yes.
Great.
Until now, no one has looked at public transit in Baltimore through an equity and environmental health lens. When we did so with the scientific and technical assistance of the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, we saw lots of inequity along racial and ethnic lines and lots of opportunity to better serve all the people in this city. I'm Samuel Jordan, president of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, BTEC. We mapped 4 key metrics of Baltimore City: transit equity, social vulnerability, pollution, and health. In all the maps,
Sam, it's really glitchy.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, why don't we stop?
Differences between white and black residential areas. We also see opportunities to improve average.
And
Well,
let's go to
shall we
questions and then
drop
maybe
a-
I can try to share from my computer and see if that's any better.
Sure.
It might be a
And
bandwidth thing.
perhaps we can drop a download link for it into the chat.
Actually, we're not quite ready to share that download link. That's gonna,
Oh, sure,
we're gonna use
sure,
that to post it. Sorry.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
Marilyn asked a good question. How will, and I hope Samuel, you can answer this. How will you use this information to influence the NESCOM State Action Plan? Do you have any plans to do that, Samuel?
We are insisting, frankly, that we introduce state plans through maybe one of several approaches. If, for example, the TCI plan develops, we want to, and the TCI, as you might know, is a plan that involves the 13 states in the Northeast corridor and Washington, D.C. In what's called a cap and investment system to reduce pollutants generated particularly by the transportation sector, which, as you know as well, generates from 35 to 40% of harmful emissions and pollutants. Now, with that system, what we're hoping is that the report that you've seen and heard, our discussion, you've seen the methodology, we're hoping that we can influence state policymakers and environmentalists to apply a system similar to ours. We certainly would be willing to advise and consult, but to apply these methodologies to conduct that kind of mapping approach in that state, so the state can have at its hand and readily available the identity, location, of the communities most in need of investments in transit equity, of course. But as in Baltimore, as you saw with the map for air quality, the very basic conclusion we can draw is Baltimore needs more air quality monitors, but that's not enough. We need to use this method to develop interventions, mitigation programs for those communities that may be fence line, front line, and historically burdened with pollutants from the transportation sector and other pollutants. So we certainly want to use this to have the states able to identify the communities, then work with those communities to determine the scope of the issue, set a price tag once we've determined the damage done, and begin a mitigation process. Does it help, Marilyn, answer your question about the how we would use it for state action plan?
Nirvana, did you have a question? It looks like you came off mute. And Marilyn, great. I'm glad that answered your
Thank you,
question.
Marilyn. We're glad.
Oh, my only question was, I know that you mentioned something about an organization in Atlanta, and I wanted to know what that was again. I would definitely want to be involved. As you probably know, there's so much going on in Atlanta, and like a lot of different things when it comes to zoning and people trying to, I think there are communities that want to kind of isolate themselves and not have MARTA run in certain communities. So it would be interesting if I could get involved and really explore that.
Let me do this. And that was, who was speaking just then?
That was Nirvana.
Nirvana.
Yes, I will put against your own name, if I can do that right. I see it. The name of a contact, Valerie, in Atlanta, who actually is the co-founder of the March Army. And I'm sure he'd be glad to discuss what March Army is doing now and their objectives with respect to improving transit equity in the Atlanta region. So I'll put that information in the chat by your name.
Thank you so much.
You're more than
Great. I'm excited that you want to get involved, Nirvana. We need an army of people. I love their name, the MARTA Army.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions, thoughts, reactions? I would love to learn about each of the folks who are in the room, what you work on, why you're here. Should we go around? Are you guys open to that, to make this a little bit more engaging since we have the time?
I can start if you like.
Great. Thanks, Nirvana.
No problem. So my name is Nirvana Finley. I live in Atlanta, and right now I am a consultant. So typically my work is around CPG companies. So we work with like Coca-Cola, Kimberly-Clark, and things like that. But I've always had a passion for working in nonprofit. And also I have a master's in public health. It's just that my life kind of took a turn into like corporate America. So my brother is actually Jan Michael, and he's the one that sent me the link to all of these different things. So I was like, okay, let's see what's going on here. So super interested to get involved. He's definitely opened up my eyes to the different work that he's been doing in Maryland. So it's been really awesome. So that's a little bit about me.
That's great. I knew I loved Dion Michael, and now I love him even more for recruiting you. That's great. I love it. And I mean, I feel like you're getting back to your roots, right? I feel like, a degree in public health is, and you can use it no matter what you do. And I think it's great that you work for CPG companies, because we need public health people concerned about equity there too, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So you do a little bit along the way.
That's great. Who else is willing to introduce themselves? Oh, I see Natasha's in the room. Did you see that? Yay!
I had to
How are
come
you?
late, but I want to still attend the session.
I was talking about you with Samuel earlier. Would you introduce yourself and tell everybody about your organization? This is a great chance to maybe spread the word.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Natasha. I'm actually a rising high school senior, so probably a bit younger than most of you here. But I'm the co-founder of an organization called the Environmental Justice Coalition. So our goal is basically getting like Gen Z and young people involved and aware in environmental justice specifically, since a lot of that focus is more on like climate change or like more specific aspects of the issue. So just trying to get people more aware of that and uplifting the communities impacted by like environmental racism and different inequities. So we do this through like policy development, advocacy to legislators, like content creation, education, all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
And Natasha's working with both Samuel and I. And we're just so excited to have her energy and intelligence and passion. So thanks for being here.
Very important demographic on these issues, not just climate change and the environment, but solutions and programs that can lead to the kind of investments we know we need.
Yep, absolutely. And others, feel free to put your video on if you don't mind. We would love to see you. Make it a little bit more, I miss in person. Anybody else willing to tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're here?
I'll go ahead. Hi, my name is Valerie. I am a second-year Master's of Public Health student at East Carolina University. This is my second career. I spent many years in the business sector. I work for State University now. And this past summer, I took a environmental health class, and rural. East Carolina focuses really on rural. And this is my second rural class, and I grew up, in the urban city. So rural to me is like a whole new world. And then to learn about environmental problems in the rural, which is like, wow. I mean, just like mind blowing, and especially in North Carolina, which is a high population of African Americans that live in rural area, tobacco farms, the animal agriculture was really, really exciting. I didn't catch your whole this session, but it was really great. I mean, the more I learned, because my particular area is African American maternal health, but that all ties into environmental justice.
Yes.
So this is really great. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, I was mentioning, in fact, Valerie, we are also trying to make sure that the environmental movements and the transit equity movements see how much we have in common. And the transit equity movement, of course, seeks to reduce congestion, reduce pollution from vehicular exhaust. And we are all involved in the challenge that climate change is bringing to us. So we're looking for a different way to plan cities as well, to have livable, breathable, walkable cities that we can organize best around internal combustion engine systems. So we're trying to make sure that our movements, transit equity and environmental movements, see a common path forward.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. I'd love to hear that this is your second career. I feel like, I don't know, we need all the people we can get. And I like that you bring a different perspective and a different background. And gosh, you're so right. Like, a lot of public health is focused on cities, and rural areas have so many issues, and they've been neglected. And so I'm excited to hear that you're focusing in on that, Valerie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I think I saw, was that Sandy who put her video on? It was so good to see a face, Sandy. Thank you. Would you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Sandy Olek. I'm with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and I joined you guys late. I admit I'm a session hopper, and there's so much I want to take in. So I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the conversation. I work in the coastal program and with the state. So we're focused on climate resiliency, adaptation, working with local partners to ensure readiness, provide tools, funding, and assistance. And I joined just in time to hear Yan's sister, which just excites me so much. I work with Yan on a regular basis, and we're co-presenting the tool in the next session. So I can't wait to tell him I kind of met his sister.
So cool.
But going back to the conversation you were just having from the state perspective, we are always trying to get our head around strategies. There's no one size fits all, and there's strategies that we need for urban, suburban, and rural environments, even within the context of climate resiliency, health disparities, access to park space, which is my area of interest. So it's a conversation we're always having.
One of our objectives, Sandy, is to expand the research of Baltimore City, the region, and we hope to get support for applying that to the state of Maryland. So you should hear from us soon.
Okay, great.
Great. Yeah. And I mean, Samuel highlighted the connections between, you know, we talked about air pollution, the transit air pollution health sort of like continuum. But he did mention, you know, climate change is a whole other piece of that equation. And it's so complicated because, you know, while transit is not only spewing air pollutants, it's also spewing carbon dioxide and leading to climate change. And then climate change leads to extreme temperature and extreme weather. And then that impacts health. And so we kind of didn't even really touch that. But I love, Sandy, that you can see the connections between climate and transit and health. Others?
Good afternoon. My name is Marilyn Marsh Robinson, and I am the partnerships manager in the North Carolina office for environmental defense funds, transportation electrification program. And for those who may not know, Environmental Defense Fund is a national nonprofit environmental advocacy organization. And so my work is engaging partners, often diverse partners, partners of faith, rural, impacted communities around various issues, including transportation. And I also help the program think about transportation equity. Our priority is medium heavy duty trucks and the diesel pollution that comes from those trucks, and thinking about in the communities that are impacted most, and that, you know, investments should be prioritized into those communities, right? So it was just a great, and I did come to the session late. I had another engagement, so I'm coming to the conference late, but it's great hearing about you know, the focus on health disparities, and just thinking, right, about the different needs in urban, suburban, and rural areas, because, you know, thinking about equitable infrastructure, and of course the need to engage communities as we talk about these solutions. I also sit on just a couple of things. I've volunteered for years with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, and I sit on DEQ's Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board for North Carolina. So it's really great being part of this conference and listening in to hear all the great work that's going on. And thank you for your contributions as well.
Marilyn, I'm sorry.
That's
Marilyn,
right, you go.
I'd like to touch base with you later because I have a couple more papers to write and research. So since you're in North Carolina, I would love to network with you and include you in some of my studies.
Okay, please do. Please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to make the same comment to Marilyn and to Nirvana earlier, Sandy, to get link email address, because we do want to develop a partnership with the state offices, particularly, so that we're making certain that there is the resources that can follow what we can identify, or we can help identify in the communities that need investments. So it's best to be able to talk to a group like Marilyn, you mentioned the Environmental Defense Group in North Carolina, and your other affiliations. Well, the same with Nirvana and Sandy. We want to follow this because at the moment, you see, there's no uniform approach in the states to how to address this question, particularly because it involves questions of equity. So there's a historic pattern in dismissing the problem. Now we have a chance to supply a fact-based approach to how we identify it, measure it, get its dimensions, and then determine with the community's involvement what solutions are appropriate, what mitigation efforts are appropriate. So I would really like for you, Marilyn, and Yvonne and Sandy, to make sure we can connect with you after the program.
Sure, absolutely.
Samuel, do you want to share your contact information in the chat? That way people know how to reach you. Does that sound good?
Yes.
And I have to ask.
Dorothy Morrison's still here in the group too. I don't know if she's already introduced herself. I saw her.
Who was it? I'm sorry.
Dorothy Morrison.
Oh, there she is. Yeah.
Andy, look.
Sorry, Dorothy.
You were just going to drag me into this.
Dorothy and I have worked together for years, and we do have interagency committee or a work group on smart growth, and I'll let her speak.
Okay, Sandy, I definitely owe you one here. I'm trying to be incognito. No, in all seriousness, obviously, I work for well, I guess I still do work for Maryland Department of Transportation. I am the outgoing director for environment and sustainability. Okay, and really much of my work over the years have been sort of pushing the agency to sort of adopt a more sustainable ethic in all we do in our multimodal system. And obviously sustainability includes environment, social aspects, and economic aspect as well. And you can't address social issues without equity and things like environmental justice. So we did recently launch a new initiative, which is to develop an environmental justice policy and implementation strategy to ramp up our community engagement and try to uplift communities, try to right the wrongs. We know that transportation has caused, in many instances, injustices or grief for a lot of communities. So just looking to how we try to fix that, given the current federal I guess appropriations that we'll have and funding. So we're trying to do that. Like I said, the agency just launched that, but I'm on my way out. So I hope that they will have another director who can fill my shoes and just carry on with this charge, and hopefully it'll be a priority for the agency moving forward. So I was definitely interested in this session, and like Sandy, I've been like hopping from here to there throughout the last 3 days in this EJ and health session. So yeah, so I am Dorothy Morrison.
So good to have you. Thanks for speaking up and not being too angry at Sandy for calling you out. We appreciate it, Sandy. And it sounds like I agree, Sandy. This will be a big loss for the state of Maryland when Dorothy moves on.
Oh, well, thank you. But I plan to stay engaged, and to the extent I can continue to advise our leadership to do the right thing, I will certainly do that.
Sometimes it's easier from the outside to push in, especially
exactly. No constraints, right?
Exactly. And especially because you know how the inside works. So now you really know what to do. Yeah, this is great. That's awesome. Anyone else want to introduce themselves and talk about their work and how it overlaps with transit equity and environmental health? Mike or Bill, Denise, not to call y'all out, but really to do it. All right. Oh, I see Bill unmuted.
I have only intermittent connection, so I You could lose me at any time. I wasn't really planning to participate, but while I'm connected, first I apologize, I'm either dressed or groomed. This is very early on Saturday morning for me. I have had difficulties accessing most of the conference, but Jan Michael thoughtfully, after the morning session has begun, sends a further link, a Zoom link. This WOVA thing befuddles me. But I first met Sam at a EJ conference about 6 years ago in College Park. I support the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. I look forward to it expanding to suggest that we ought to have transit equity throughout the state and across the nation and around the world. One thing while I'm still connected, we have folks we've elected to office who are thought to be progressive, and yet when the time comes to further progress with regard to transit and restrict somewhat expanding automobile capacity, nonetheless appoint people to boards of responsibility who support increasing automobile capacity at the expense of increasing transit capacity and therefore transit equity. And I'm not going to mention names, but we have a recent experience. If we think about it, we know. So we need to elect and hold accountable better people to office and hold them to their progressive, alleged progressive inclination, and fight for more transit capacity and less automotive capacity. Anyway, I'm surprised that I stayed connected for this long. I'm going to mute myself and remove my picture and enjoy the rest of the session.
Let me just make this one comment, Bill, that will give you and our attendees just an idea of how imbalanced the investment picture can be. In Maryland, in the State Department of Transportation's budget, 77% of the budget is dedicated to State Highway Administration. Only 2% of the budget is dedicated to the Maryland Transit Administration. And that transit administration must operate the core bus service, the light rail, subway, commuter rail, and commuter bus. And that core bus service, with its 83% Black ridership, has been denounced by riders uniformly as completely unreliable. But it also doesn't permit and the agency hasn't taken advantage of or hasn't explored this connection between public health and the environment to the detriment. So you can see we want to adjust when we speak with a project like ours, backing us up with factual data. We want to adjust the way in which states invest, and automobile-centric culture, frankly, has seen its best days, but it's still taking the lion's share of the state's budget.
Thanks so much, Bill, for your support of BTEC, and for, I thought what you said it very well about the differences between investing in cars and in transit. So I think we just have like 6 minutes left. Should I try to share the video and then we can close? Does that sound like a good plan, Samuel?
Let's try it.
All right.
We'll see what happens.
Give it a go.
Until now, no one has looked at public transit in Baltimore through an equity and environmental health lens. When we did so, with the scientific and technical assistance of the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, we saw lots of inequity along racial and ethnic lines, and lots of opportunity to better serve all the people in this city. I'm Samuel Jordan, president of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, BTEC. We mapped 4 key metrics for Baltimore City: transit equity, social vulnerability, pollution, and health. In all the maps, a darker color indicates areas of greater need. When we mapped transit equity, we saw the patterns marking major differences between white and Black residential areas. We also see opportunities to improve average commute time and the difference in commute time between those taking public transit and those using a personal vehicle. When we looked at social vulnerability, we again see racial differences emerge. The darker areas show neighborhoods whose residents are more likely to live in poverty or to be people of color. Looking at air pollution, We saw that areas close to the Patapsco River in the southeast had a higher burden of air pollution, possibly related to Baltimore's port industry emissions and the incinerator. When we looked at health outcomes related to air pollution, we saw again patterns indicating racial inequity. But downtown and areas along the water lit up as places for opportunities as well. To encourage investments in public transit, we overlaid all 4 maps to identify areas most in need of attention, equity, and investment. Let's work together to build a better Baltimore and connect those most in need of jobs, healthy food, education, and healthcare with exactly what they need through strategic investments in public transit.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh yeah, let's add that link to the chat. Thank you so much, Marilyn. That's a great suggestion. Sam or Samuel, any final thoughts that you want to leave folks with while I grab that link?
No, I'm encouraged. And I think this is, I hope for many of our participants, a good start, but a good way to begin framing that question, particularly when it may have not gotten this detailed attention in the past. Now is the time to take advantage of what we know must be done, and that is to mitigate, to reduce, to, in fact, address the harm that these pollutants and emissions are doing all over the states, all over the country. So this is the beginning.
Thank you, Samuel, for the closing words. Thank you, audience, for participating and engaging with us. You know, as I think Samuel said, we'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and to hear from you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I decided to briefly get on camera just to say hi. I'm in my Saturday attire, right? So anyway.
Me
Take
too.
care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.